All right. One of my favorite things to talk about, podcast length. And I say it's my favorite because it's the dumbest thing to talk about, in my opinion. But people are going to ask, so I'm going to answer. So be ready. How long should my podcast be? Well, the answer is however long it takes you to get your point across. It's that simple. The most successful podcast in the world is Joe Rogan, and it's 3.5 hours on average. And he's done almost 1,900 of them as of recording this. You know, other podcasts are 5 minutes, also very successful. Typically, the answer you're going to hear most often is between 30 and 60 minutes. Now, that can depend on the topic. People say that because it's the average time of a commute, and a commute is probably the most popular time people listen to podcasts. So, if you're just starting, I would give you advice between 30 to 60 minutes, but don't treat that as gospel. There is no right or wrong answer as to how long your podcast should be. It should take however long it takes you to get your point across. Every time I have a guest, I ask them if they can go longer, if we go longer. Because if I'm in the flow of things and it's a great conversation, I don't want it to stop. And it shouldn't stop because you have this unknown, arbitrary time frame. You know, people kind of get stuck, in my opinion, on that traditional media. I use that in air quotes again, of like, you know, Nickelodeon has a 30-minute time slot for all their shows. It can't be longer. Actually, it's 22 with ads. You know, NBC has their news segment for 2 hours. Can't be longer. We got to get to Survivor next, right? Like, podcasting isn't like that. Who determines how long your podcast should be? The free market of ideas. Who determines how long your podcast should be? How long it takes your audience to listen to it. Does your an experiment, right? Do a podcast that's 15 minutes. See how it does with the numbers. Do a podcast that's 2 hours. See how it does with the numbers. You know, mix and match. I mentioned Dan Carlin earlier. The guy is the #1 history podcast in the world, at least in my opinion. It's one of the most popular. He releases probably 6 a year if we're lucky. And the podcast like 4-5 hours by himself, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's hardcore history. Chris, remember on the Talking with Tarashuk podcast, they did the most important day in human history?
Yes, I do not remember your answer though. I think it was Normandy.
No, it was World War I. So I got that question from Dan Carlin's Hardcore History because he started his 6-part series on World War I with how World War I started and what he says is the most important day in human history. And, you know, it's a 4.5-hour podcast, and it's part 1 of 6. So altogether, the whole series is like 20 hours, give or take. And he released it over like a few years. But that podcast is massively successful, and it's super long. New York Times has something that's like 10-15 minutes daily. Also, very successful. So when it comes to show length, it's up to you.
It's up to you.
I'm sorry, there is no magic wand to tell you what it is. Sometimes you got to make your own decisions. And with podcast length, in my opinion, that's one of them.
I've had people starting off like, "Oh, is that too long?" No. It's up to you.
Yeah.
Did you get your point across?
Do you think it's too long? Yeah, then it's too long.
Yeah.
And if you're one of those people who wants it to be a concise 30 minutes, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. I just think it doesn't matter one way or the other.
It doesn't. I mean, I do think there should be, once you decide on how long you want your podcast to be, at that point, you should try to have some consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, people tune in. You don't want to have something that's an hour and a half and then they come back for more and it's 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Or the other way around. But having more and then less, you know, you don't want to disappoint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just find what works for you. You know, there is no right or wrong answer. And if you want to go by what your audience thinks is best, do that. If you want to go by what you think is best, do that. If you're good enough, people listen to you for 2 hours. If you're not, they won't.
Market demands.
Market demands. I mean, podcasting is the free market of ideas. It really is. It's one of the last places where the free market is steady and strong, and it's not going anywhere.